Good evening. So I think we're about ready to kick off our district and commission meeting. This is Simone Tarver. I'll start with our roll call, alphabetical order. So Mary Fosse,
Here.
Chris Gray,
Present.
Jim Langus,
Here.
Ethel McNeil,
Here.
John Monroe,
Here.
Kari Quas,
Here.
Simone Tarver here, Ben Young,
Here.
Julius Wilson. Awesome. So we'll roll on to our next item, staff comments. Turn it over to Nicole.
Cannot hear you, Nicole. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I have two mutes. So thank you everyone for showing up to this additional meeting today. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be really helpful for us to have some conversations around things like Jim brought up last week, deviation, just kind of having those conversations around what our priorities are as a group and really get your questions answered from the presentation that Tony gave last week. So with that, we'll keep this as short as possible, but we can totally run until 7:30 if the conversation takes us that way. So it should be, fairly free flowing. We did get the feedback link set up, and so I'm going to email that out during this meeting. So tomorrow or this week, you guys can go through and write your pros and cons for each map, A1 through B1. And with that, I think we should if Tony has any comments, we'll listen to those, and then I think we'll move forward with deviation as our first topic.
Did we send out the link to the map, to the ArcGIS map? I think you're on mute.
I thought you might put that up on the screen and go through it before I sent out
Okay.
a link.
Okay.
It can be confusing sometimes.
All right. Well, I put together something that you all may or may not use, but it's an ArcGIS web map application. And what it'll enable you to do is to zoom down and look at the precincts juxtaposed to the districts or anything else that you want to actually look at. And so let me share my screen. Is this available? Do you see a map?
Yes.
Excellent. And so what you're seeing is an online map, and you're able to access this map via this web link. Now, unfortunately, Esri only makes two different ways, really, to access content. One is you make it public for everyone, or you make it private for your organization or who you choose to see. But if you make it private, then you have to have an ArcGIS license. And so this is public, but no one knows the web link and the web ID here. But you can access it at any time, but anybody else can access it as well. And I tried to make it generic. So someone, the only way to find it would be to search around and have some sort of chance that someone would come across it. And so you're able to access it right now if you have the link. And so what I wanted to do was just to go over some of the features if you choose to actually use it, but it may be very, very helpful. And so just like most of the web applications, you have this plus or minus. That's a zoom that allows you to zoom in and zoom out. And I'm just going to go quickly through the features. You have this home that brings you back to wherever, for example, if I was out like that, this brings you back to the original screen. This right here is your location, and depending upon what type of PC you have or computer you have, whether you have a GPS chip inside. This is your location of your computer. So if you clicked on it, it would zoom to the location of your computer. If it doesn't have a GPS, it may be off by a few blocks or something because you use a different way to actually sort of triangulate where the location is. But that's your location, your home. This, you can actually zoom down to a particular city, a zip code, if you will, in this particular case, because we're using the city. Over on the right, you have the layers that have been enabled. And so you can see the layers that have been enabled. Next to that are the layer lists, and this is the ability to select the layers. And so right now I've included Plan A, Plan A2, A3, and B1. And so you're able to select any one of these, and so you can see how each one of these plans are. All right. You're able to actually take the precincts off if you wanted to, and you're just looking at the neighborhoods. You're able to actually add the core areas if you want to see these are the core areas that we actually looked at. And you're able to take all of it off. If you don't want the neighborhood showing, we can just show that. And so if we zoom in, just to give you an idea, as you zoom in, the detail gets a little clearer and clearer. So for example, if we go to this northern end of District 2, we're now able to see the streets that are bounded by that particular area. Is it at 22nd Street? If you can see it, maybe light on your screen since I'm sharing it, 23rd Street right there. And of course, we can add the precincts. With the precinct layer, you see this number right here. That's 1,012. I may try to make that a little larger, just so you can see it, but that's the population. So therefore, you have the population that's inside each of these. You're also able to click. And if you click, you notice it's got one of two. And so right now, there are two layers that really are enabled when you do that. I can disable the second one, which is the district. But this gives you information on the precincts. And so you see the population and the Hispanic, white, black, and Native American, and then the name Everett 12. If you click here, this gives you the district because it also clicked inside the district. And I can disable that, but sometimes you may want to see what's inside the district. So I kept it enabled. I think that's pretty much it. Oh, I also incorporated, this is a web map application. I also incorporated this selection tool right here. And so if you click on this selection tool, what you're able to do is click your left mouse, drag, and you can highlight precincts. And so you see how we can highlight. We can add precincts to that. If I press the shift key down and hold it down, I can add another one. If I want to remove one, I would just use the control key, hold that down, and I can remove it. So once I do that, I can actually look at down here. This is an attribute table. I can bring that up, and you see that there are three. Let me see if I can go over here. 3 precincts that are selected, they're highlighted. I also, under this option, I could export this to a comma delimited file if I wanted to. All right. If I just want to show just the selection, I can click that and only the selection, and then I can export that. And that's somewhat of a quick and dirty. Let me take this off of here, clear it. You clear the selection here, 1 or 2. There's a few other features, but that's probably 90% of what it does. Are there any questions?
That's very cool, Tony. Thanks for doing that.
Excellent. Okay.
So I just emailed out a link to that That will also be for those listening at home, this interactive map link. I'm going to put it on the website so people following along can go in and do their own research if they so choose. And then I also sent you all a link to the form for after this meeting asking for your feedback on the maps, which we'd already talked about. So with that, I think we should open it up to the deviation conversation. So Tony, do you want to give us a really brief recap of your recommendations on deviation and what that means, and then we can open it up for discussion.
Right. Right now, we have the plus or minus 5%. We have 10% that the courts have ruled that we should stay within. Map drawers usually use plus or minus 5% as their guide for each district. Was there a question?
No, I just muted someone. They just had background noise.
Okay, I'm sorry. And so the question is how close to zero do you actually get? And the answer really relies on the trade-offs. For each of these traditional redistricting criteria, there are trade-offs. So if you want something to be more closer rather to the ideal population size, that's at 2640, 604, you have to most likely either split a neighborhood in our case, and that's really the big units that we're actually using. If we were, if we had the ability to split precincts, we would split a precinct, but that's not the case. Or you many times would make something less compact because you're trying to reach a certain ideal population size. And so you're grabbing something that is irregularly shaped to add on or to subtract, which makes the district irregularly shaped. So there are trade-offs. And so the rule of thumb is unless you, exceed that 10% plus or minus 5, then it's okay. Of course, you could say that closer you get to zero, the better, but they're acceptable. Unless there's some reason that there's something nefarious going on, meaning that if you're trying to overpopulate, let's just say say minority districts, because really what you're trying to do is pack extra people in there. If you're doing something nefarious like that, then of course that can't be done. But under normal situations, normal configurations, as long as you stay within that plus or minus 5% deviations, you'll be okay. And the exceptions are also, I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can reshare my screen. There we go. Most people, let me see if I can get this. I'm trying to get let's see. Does everyone see a table, if you will?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, there are exceptions to the rules in the jurisdiction. So I like to come to this. This is the NCSL National Conference for State Legislatures, and they keep track of state legislatures and congressional districts throughout the country. And so there are exceptions to the rules. And so this is the deviation table for 2010. And as you can see, even congressional, you see 428 congressional districts, as you remember in that first training, you're supposed to have 0 or 1 person or -1. Well, there are several states that actually have 428, 690, 682, 334, and even the state legislatures, 21% here for Hawaii and 1162. And I think I might have mentioned there are always exceptions to the rules, even when it comes to equal population. So if for some reason the jurisdiction found some compelling reason to actually exceed the 10%, it most likely would fly as long as it's not really extreme. Now, I'm not recommending that by no means. I'm just saying there are cases that even the standards that are put in place can be exceeded if the jurisdiction has a compelling reason to do so. Let me go back to that. And once again, are there any questions to what I'm saying, talking about?
Hey, Tony, this is John Monroe. I do have one question about the deviation. When you're putting together the districts, should you give or should we give any consideration to areas that we expect to grow? Increase in population?
Very good. And I mentioned that, I think, in a couple of meetings ago. It would behoove, if we could, the city if we could, meaning that if it, say, overpopulated the districts, and I say over meaning that it's on the plus side, districts that you think it's growing, because when the data comes in, the 2020 data comes in, it may be already within deviation, and you may not have to change that district at all. So the answer is, if you can, yes, but you can do that, but of course you can't violate any other principles just because you're trying to look out for the 2020 census. But the answer is, it makes sense for us to at least look at that. But that's not something I would choose going in. That's something I would choose at the end when we're ready to adjust. Just minor adjustments here and there. Pick a plan that works first, then look at the estimated population. We'll use that with the enriched data that Esri will provide. And then just get an idea. And by the way, the Esri populated data is not going to be perfect, but at least give us an indication of which ones are higher populated and which ones will probably be lower populated. But I would do it at the end when we pick that particular district, or maybe a couple of districts, let's say. But that's a good question.
Okay, that helps. Thanks, Tony.
Appreciate it. Any other questions? Well, that's all I had, was to show you this tool, if you will. So
Well, that's no questions on deviation, but
right.
Are we going to move on to questions from last week's material now then?
Yes. I was going to ask, were there any other general questions pertaining to this? And I know the concept really was to possibly go into looking at precincts and looking at changes to one of the plans in order for us to sort of be able to select one or two of these already developed plans, and then begin to sort of change and alter them precinct at a time. I did want to show you, if there are no questions right now, some of the problems. I'm rolling this out. It doesn't seem like it's methodical, but it is methodical. I am going from general to more specific. And so, first we pick the cores. So now we have these seeds of the district. Then we populate those seeds in different ways. And that's the plans, these original plans, meaning that we populate different areas. Then we move down to the precinct level and begin to add this precinct. What does that do? And why would we add that? Or subtract that precinct, the reasons why would we do that? We don't like downtown, for example, we don't like downtown being included, let's remove that. And that's what I did in that second plan. Or, well, we don't like this neighborhood being included, and I say don't like, but there's a rationale for it. But what I was going to point out was the problems that we have, or the constraints that we have with the precincts overlapping neighborhoods. And so, for example, I mentioned this. You see, this neighborhood overlaps that precinct. This precinct actually goes into, let me make sure let me pull back so I can see which neighborhood that is. No, it's not Glacier View. And I didn't make it selectable. Let me see.
Tony, I think it's South Forest Park.
I think you're right. I think you're right on. I appreciate that. Thank you. And so what I was looking at is this is one of those examples where this actually goes and splits South Forest Park. And then View Ridge Matter here. And so we really don't have a choice if we're going to select this precinct to be in this neighborhood, this district, it's going to split that neighborhood. A more or a better example is why we are constrained around District 4. Mm-hmm. This right here, this is a precinct. And so this precinct goes all the way, see, into that Boulevard Bluff area. Mm. And so we either select this and place that in 4, which kind of doesn't make sense, split that neighborhood completely, or we keep it and we have that inside this district. And so that's another reason why District 4 is pretty much frozen. You see, this is another precinct that does it. So if we want to keep Boulevard Bluff somewhat intact without splitting it all the way up here, it's going to have to be, these areas right here are going to have to be included in this district. Hence, the Boeing Freeway becomes sort of that boundary line for 4, and that's another reason. Now, you remember that B1, that District 2 came all the way over here, and I could do that. I could grab this area just to try something different and make that coastal district. But I couldn't go further than that, or I would split that precinct. So this became sort of a wall that made me have to stop here, and I couldn't go any further. And so throughout, there are precincts that actually will split neighborhoods. And so we are definitely not going to have to, we're definitely going to have to split neighborhoods. There's no question. And so, you want to try to keep them intact, but there's no question you can't keep them all intact. And there are other reasons.
Tony, this is Kari Quas. I guess my question maybe is about precincts, just to understand when they were developed and if there's any power to change them over time, or if they're just set and this is how it is. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. And let me, here's the bad news, I guess, is, you can change precincts at any time. If you want to do that, it causes havoc to do that. And the reason for that is that anytime you split a precinct, there's a potential of having multiple ballots. I'm sure all of us have probably experienced that, where we actually you come in and you have one ballot being in one district and another ballot for another district, and you're at the same precinct. And so you really don't want to do that. If you do that, then you want to reallocate the area to another precinct, and so it gets a little complicated. But in this particular case, part of the problem that exists is you also have to think about your census geography. And what the city of Everett has done, which is the right thing to do, is they have sent in, and I don't know what they've done this time, but they've sent in back in 2000, or prior to 2010, it matched the precincts up with what's called VTDs, these voting tabulation districts. And they are built upon census blocks. And so when you begin to draw your plans, you're building it on the geography that you need to build upon to draw your plans, which is really the census geography. And so that actually occurs in the 7th year, 8th year, I believe it's the 7th or the 8th year. I think it ends before the 9th year. And so they submit to the Census Bureau the geographies that they want to change, one of them being census blocks. They can suggest changing census block boundaries, and they can submit changing their voting tabulation district. So that has already occurred. And so not knowing where it stands for 2020, because we're not involved in 2020 right now, because we're in the interdecennial period. We're looking at 2010 census geography and population, really. But I don't know where it stands with the 2020 voting tabulation districts, because it's really not part of this what we're doing now, this exercise right here.
Thank you.
As you, I just will say, as you go through, if you can access it, it really will help out. If you can access this web map application, it will showcase a lot of things that I've kind of said on the slide. Like, oops, here's another precinct that splits that Delta precinct in Port Gardner. You can see that. So it's a matter of when you grab it, it has to be in one district or the other. And here's that little piece over here. And when I say in the slide PowerPoint presentation that just for a little segment, that's what I meant. Yeah. So, yes.
Tony, I have a question. How will splitting up the neighborhoods affect the ballots? No.
Insofar as
mailing them, them being mailed out, like the time maybe. Okay, I live in South Everett.
Mm-hmm.
To tell you an example, I live in South Everett.
Uh-huh.
Voting that we had for the council, for the city council member and the county council member last year, 2019, I didn't receive my ballot till 2 weeks after the election was ended. So even if I voted, sent it in, it wouldn't have mattered because it already ended 2 weeks prior to me receiving it.
Right.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this area that gets the ballots 2 weeks after everything is already done.
No.
So,
yeah.
You answer that question?
Well, yeah, that's a separate issue from the splitting of neighborhoods.
Example. Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if that shouldn't be happening. Let me just say that should not be happening.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here, to stop that. So.
Yeah. That should not be happening. And so I don't know the correct recourse, but you should contact. We have a voting registrar here. I don't know what you all may call it.
The county. I can connect Julius via email later. It would be a county.
The elections office.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, you should check that, and you should. Most jurisdictions have the ability to check your address online, or many of them. Let's say you should go. I'm sure they should have a website where you can put in some information and check to see if they have the proper address there.
I filtered everything out and sent it in to receive it. So it happened. This was not the first time. It was in 2018. I filtered everything out to vote, and it took forever for me to receive the ballot again. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. So 2019 comes, and now I'm paying attention. I'm aware, and like I said, 2 weeks after everything was sealed, done.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
that definitely should not happen. And yes, you should contact them to let them know that it's happened twice. And if you're you may want to discuss it.
I'll send Julius an email right now with the county elections office information. Is there any more questions on this map and how this works in relation to deviation?
I don't have any more questions on that.
And so just, I guess, to close out deviation, one, we need to stay within that ±5. And two, at the end, I think we can take a look at adding or subtracting precincts in order to prepare for 2020, but not at the jeopardy of having a great plan. And so, and that's why it should be done at the end, because it may change the compactness, it may change some splitting of another neighborhood. And so, but once we get down to sort of a final plan or two, then we can begin to look at things like that. Any general questions, I guess, now on the map? And here's, I guess, how potentially you can use, this. You can look at the population, and of course, you have the documentation of what the district population is, and you can actually begin to make changes on your own, really, somewhat knowing that, okay, if I add this area, I need to possibly subtract another 1,000 people somewhere else. There's one last thing that I didn't tell you about, which is the layer, which is this. Each of these have the ability to be transparent, and so you can move this and make that more transparent. It becomes nothing's there. But the reason why you may want to do that is because you may want to zoom down to see something, some area that you specifically are interested in. You see that this becomes, as I move down, you see I can even see the structure, these structures. And so as you become familiar, or you are familiar with that area, you'll say, okay, that's and I saw the Walgreens pop up there, right there. So you know those areas. There are some other layers that I can also probably add to this. And so I'll go to the city website and look at the other shapefiles, and maybe that also help you with orienting yourself to where you're located, if you know certain landmarks.
And Mr. Fairfax, you provided us with some solid information. You're a districting master, and what we've received, much of it is state updates that we received from May 1st to May 4th. But you provided us with considerable information, and I suspect that the entire group has looked at this and studied it. Perhaps we should focus on what you provided as a basis to conclude our discussions this evening.
So does that mean you would like to revisit the plans, or would you like to?
It's whatever the group would like to how they would like to structure this evening's meeting. I had thought that was what we were intending to to do this evening was to look at what the information you'd sent us and to provide some feedback and to discuss it.
Right.
Yeah, discussion and questions on the information provided last week, but Chris and you, Jim, had both requested some precinct information. So Tony wanted to provide you with a quick tutorial of how to look at that information. I sent you the link in the email, so we were just covering that. But I think you're right. I think now we can move on to questions on the material provided last week.
Yeah, well, I think it was real helpful for Chris to ask for that information. It was a piece that we should have had a chance to consider, and we did this evening. So, and maybe there's more coming, but that was a good addition to what we've been provided so far.
Excellent. So are there any questions that are left over from the plans? I can show you that PowerPoint slide presentation. I can bring that up. And so originally, the concept that I had was for us to look at these plans and plan A, A2, A1, A2, A3, and the B1, and then see or pick one or two of them to say this is sort of the general plan that that I like. And then we would go in and begin to modify that plan at the precinct level. We don't like, and you all know much better than I. There's a mall in this area, and just for example, it should be in this district, not that district, and let's see if we can move that precinct over. And then look at the ramifications, because once we do it, we may say, no, that's not going to work. And so eventually that's the level that I was looking for, probably in June and maybe even July, let's say, that we would be working.
Tony, this is Kari Quast. I know from the last meeting, I think I heard Jim say his concern related to the deviation in the numbers, and maybe it was so much that we were trying to say that 20,006 something or whatever the number was. So on Plan A1, District 1 had 19,000 something, District 2 had 20,800 something. And I think I understood his question to be, and I guess to you, does it matter, really, if one has 19,000 and one has 20,000, as long as the district itself is representational of the voters of that area? Is that okay that one is 20-something and one is 19-something?
Right. And the answer is yes, it's okay. Do we want to shoot for zero deviation? I would think not on all of these, because we don't even know if we could, using the precinct as sort of the sub-building block. Most likely we can't get close on every district because we are using precincts. But two, it is not unusual to have a district at 4% and another district at -2 or -3, even -4%. That's not unusual. The key is whether you're trying to do something nefarious in that. Are you trying to get over on something and you're trying to do it using deviation? But as far as what's acceptable, it's acceptable for that. To stay within that. 10% plus or minus 5 is what we should stay in.
Thank you. since I'm still sort of talking, this is Kari again.
Good.
I guess my recollections of last week when we were diving into the numbers again, and there was the difference between A1, A2, A3, is that Pinehurst Beverly Park was split up 3 times in one of the plans and then only 2 times in one of the other. And I think that my gut is to keep it to 2 if we can.
Right.
And I certainly, the one that you spread so far and wide across the city, B1, I would almost say we could just cut it out right now, but that's up to the other commissioners as well, because it doesn't look compact, it looks off. And maybe if there's that kind of elimination as we're narrowing down, then that might get us into a discussion about why one's better or not, or something like that.
Excellent. Absolutely. And you were right on. The difference really between A1 and A2 really was the fact that that area right here, Pinehurst, was split 3 ways.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. In A2, it split only 2, and so that's eliminated. The second difference was the downtown area in A1. That downtown Bayside area was up here, and in A2 that's eliminated. And so the things that an example, just to follow along with what you're saying, the example of what you all may think is that, well, no, we like the downtown area in District 2, but we don't want to split that.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we do that? And then I would actually make a notation and say, okay, you want the downtown area, I'll put that back, but I'll try to not split Pinehurst in three ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a notation, that would be an example of what I would go and try to make a configuration off of, just to give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree with what you're saying with B1. Like I said, the purpose of B1 was, one, to try something different. One, we're trying to have a variety of configurations. One is, okay, if we had a West Coast district that encompassed the majority, let's say, of the West Coast water, how would that look? And what would be the ramifications of that? And the ramifications was that something has to, if you move here, something has to absorb these areas right here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it could be 4 coming over here, but then you'd have to actually come in and take population out of Westmont and Holly. And so there's sort of a again, there are trade-offs on practically everything you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the purpose was to come up with a different configuration. I completely agree that if I was to, eliminate one, this would be the first one to say, no, we don't want to. We're not looking at that. So we know not to look at this type of configuration for a West Coast district completely.
Can we make that a motion?
So moved. No, I think Carrie's spot on. I think we need to understand that A1 is the baseline. A2 is a significant improvement over that, and therefore I would think, as part of that motion, we would no longer look at A1, and that B1 should also be off the board because it doesn't meet the compactness in any way, shape, or form. And then we would focus on A2 and raise our questions there on A2 on what improvements that we would like to see.
Yeah.
I would, Jim, John, I would chime in here and say that while I can agree with B1, I'm not certain that I agree with you. Well, I know I'm not agreeing with you on A1. And the reason why I would say something like that is because when I see the configuration, that's where the areas that we may need to work on in those areas, where in much the same that Carrie is saying that they're what is that? I can't remember what neighborhood that is. That's split in 3 different directions, or split 3 times. But that may be where we need to work on it. In just looking at this map, I actually liked A1 because of the favorability for the Delta neighborhood, and that's the reason why I said that. It is. I do have a specific reason for saying that.
I think we have a motion on the table, correct? That's been seconded.
So the motion would be for taking A1 and B1 off the table. Was that the last motion?
The motion is to eliminate Plan B1.
Okay.
That's seconded. I can second that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to open it up for discussion? No? Okay. If there's no more discussion, we can vote. So I'll go down the line. So Mary Fosse?
Yes, eliminate.
Julie? Or Julius, did you have a comment?
That's the one that has the 3 that's split in 3s, right? The neighborhood that's split in 3s, the district.
B1 is the one that is spread across the city.
Should be on the screen now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That. Want to double check, that's all. For any listeners that's not understanding. So yeah, this is the one that's split in 3.
It splits 2, but there's a portion that comes all the way over here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we vote? Okay. Mary Fosse?
Yes, eliminate.
Chris Gray?
Yes.
Jim Malangus?
Yes.
Ethel McNeil? Ethel, it looks like you're still muted if you're talking. I'll come back to you, Ethel.
*6, Ethel, if you're on the phone. Unmute, yeah.
John Monroe?
Yes.
Okay. Ethel, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. Kari Kloss?
Yes, to eliminate.
Simone Tarver? Yes. Ben Young?
Yes.
Julius Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. So we're all on the same page about eliminating Plan B1.
And so, just to continue, just to reiterate, A1 and A2, District 2 eliminates that Bayside, and it doesn't split Pinehurst, Beverly Park into 3 areas. District 4 and 5 are relatively the same. And South Forest Park is also close to the same. And there's some differences in Riverside. Gardner is split in A1, but it's wholly contained in A2. So that's another change. So we have downtown being removed in Bayside, because I believe there's a downtown portion in Port Gardner.
Kari, yes. I'm wondering about the discussion around downtown and Bayside there, because I think it is interesting how that is different. I'd like to hear Ben's thoughts on it, because to some extent, and even Simone, you're in Bayside, I think, but just how much of the downtown are we talking about? Because you do get into some apartments and there's some housing when you get a little bit south of Pacific. But how does it line up more so maybe with 2 as opposed to District 1? I'm not sure. So I'd love to talk about that.
Where is that edge? Is that Hewitt or Pacific on the edge of Bayside? What's your southernmost edge?
Let me switch
The
back.
southernmost edge is 21st, and then that east edge is Colby, I think. Let me zoom in.
I think the east edge is Broadway, and then the south edge would be Hewitt.
Hewitt, it is Hewitt.
Bayside is,
Oh, the
Bayside
bottom
is
of
Hewitt.
it. I was
Because in some respects, I think when I think of like 21st, I mean, I'm sort of thinking of Everett High School. There's a lot of people that are around that, and Everett High School sits at 2400. Like, wouldn't it make sense if people are around that area to kind of pull them north where most of them are coming for school, to have them in the same district, as opposed to downtown where you're really dealing with apartments and maybe more businesses and that type of living. I mean, I like if it could shift over. Again, it's probably precinct level stuff, but
I would 100% agree. I actually live in that precinct, and I would say it is more like what is north of it than more of the businessy area that is right south of us. So I think that was why I kind of leaned more toward Plan 2 over Plan 1.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so pulling in that district where it says 12 or 1,012 people into District 1 North and moving that line from 21st to 25th, it looks like, give or take.
Well, I know that we had a great deal of discussion around the Delta neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that it may not be true, I just thought that the Delta neighborhood and the Riverside neighborhood they had many similar interests. And so that's why I wanted to see more of those 2 neighborhoods in the same district. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, because if we looked at it strictly from the other side, then yes, they are going to be overwhelmed by the Northwest District just because of voting, and that's where I got my bee in the bonnet there, and it was while I'm very comfortable with the other split, the A2 split, I would much rather it be that A1 be considered and see if we can adjust some lines there.
Mm-hmm. We could basically do what you would want by, we could almost add Everett 16 and Everett 17 just by moving Everett 18 into District 2. I mean, the population's off by about 200. I don't know if that would make our deviation that much worse, but if it is important to keep that Riverside area in with that District 1, Everett 18 would accommodate that, putting Everett 18 in with District 2.
So,
Simone, where are you seeing Everett 18? So we're all on the same precinct page.
So you have to click the. So I'm actually looking at the link Nicole sent us. I'm clicking them. So Everett 18 would be the one that says 1526. So that's Everett 18. And then Everett 16 is the one that says 1024, right by where it says Riverside. And then Everett 17 is 749.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is there's a preference to try to keep Riverside as much as possible in District 1. Is that correct?
Now, this is just me talking. I haven't heard anyone else piping in, so it sounds like I could easily be outvoted there, and I could live with that. I can live with that.
I agree with you, Ben.
No,
I
So
think
as well.
that the step, as I'm looking at, I see 1526 on the screen, so the hard line of District 1 is below there. If 1012, 1195, the calculation, if that zigzag line down the staircase was north and then lower than the staircase was south, I think that accomplishes which I think we're trying to do, which is keep it more neighborhood based as opposed to
Absolutely.
downtown. And then it would force, since there's 1526 population that would then be somewhere else, then you need to catch that more on the riverside.
Can I ask? I have a question. How much of this has been discussed outside of the districting then with other people in the community? Because I'm looking at last week when we talked about this, and I'm seeing some things here that don't sound right to me, and there's something not right here.
I can tell you from my perspective, Ethel, that
I'm
I haven't discussed this with anyone because I've been busy doing other stuff, and I get 4 or 5 hours maybe every 2 weeks to look at the districting period, and usually I'm at home.
So
same for me, Ethel. This is Kari. I've just looked at it last night. I poured through these, but I haven't talked to anybody about any of it.
Ethel, do you have any thoughts on this? On our discussion on maybe having that lower part of Bayside, looking at Plan A2, having that potentially be part of District 2, and then having Riverside be part of District 1. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to wait till you guys finish because I've been looking at it all day here, and I'm waiting. There's just something just doesn't feel right to me. But go ahead, keep going.
Okay. Does anyone else have any ideas, thoughts, questions, or Tony, were you about to say something?
Yes, I was just going to make a comment. If we added the Everett 16, which is this one here, and Everett 17, which is this one here, that's about 1,700. So we would have to add at least this precinct back, 18. Is that what you were talking about? Because we would have to at least add that portion to offset the population.
So obviously you would have to look at it and see if that would still keep us within that deviation that we're aiming for. I don't know if that 200 would make that big of a deal for District 1, but I think that's kind of what we're talking about, is that 18 might fit better with District 2, and then that Riverside area might go better with District 1. But of course, this is all still conversational. We're still just talking about ideas.
I want to add in that while I agree with adding 16 and removing that kind of that downtown area and shoving that south for shaping that north end district, only a portion of Delta. I don't want to say that it is beneficial to Delta to include that, because Riverside is more single family homes and a lot less diversity than Delta. So it does fit in general with the area with like Northwest and the northern side of Bayside, and more of those housing areas. So it does fit in general with the district, but in Delta, the north end of Delta with all the apartments and stuff, I don't think that part of the argument is what sells me on it. But I do agree that it does fit with the single family homes, and that would be a better configuration and still compact. So it's more in line with the community interest there.
Thank you. That's really good feedback to have.
Does anyone have any comments on A3? Since we've discussed that.
A3 takes a little bit more of Riverside on the northern end. Stays without the Delta. I mean the Bayside downtown. Continues to be without. So I'm not sure if the same issue exists with that. We would end up doing pretty much the same thing off of A3 as we do off of A2. End up removing this and then begin to add probably another precinct more. One precinct probably won't do it. It'll most likely be 2, maybe even 3.
This is Kari again. I have a question for Jim, because I think he said he lived in South Forest Park. And I'm wondering from A3, that South Forest Park is split right down the middle, and it's not that big of a neighborhood, but is it where there's enough trees and barrier that you're not really participating with your neighbors on the other side, or would it be very odd to be walking across the street and this person's in a different district as opposed to the person on the other side of the street? Because it looks like it's on College Avenue, which is kind of right in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. I don't know that it would matter, Kari.
Okay.
If we were going to split Forest Park somehow, I would think where Peck's Drive is, where you've got the little jog, that might be a separation. If you needed to move some of that area in South Forest Park. Otherwise, in a perfect situation, you Forest Park intact, and the line would follow View Ridge and stop there. But I haven't really focused on that. What is your thought on
that? There we go. Now I'm unmuted again. I'm just trying to figure out. I mean, ideally, right, we don't split any neighborhoods. It's impossible. We're going to split neighborhoods. I'm just trying to really think of when we start to get fine-tune in, which, as Tony has said, that little, hey, this line moves, to make sure that we believe, as the people living across the city, that they feel connected to their neighbors and that they have their like interests and all of that met. So would South Forest Park and that thing be enough like View Ridge Madison? Maybe that would be fine. Or, it just gets such these finer details. And I don't think we're all acting for our neighborhoods per se. I'm just trying to really just have that finer discussion of, I want to make sure, because we don't have everybody, all the neighborhoods are not represented on our commission. How do we make sure that they know that we did our due diligence to get it so they feel like they're all connected where it makes sense? That's my goal.
That's the perfect idea. That's exactly right. And since we are dealing with precincts, there really only 3 ways to split South Forest Park, which would be this precinct, that precinct, and this one that is going to be split in one way, shape, or form, unless we actually include it in the district. If we try to actually separate View Ridge Madison from South Forest Park, something's got to split.
Yeah.
So.
Well.
Yes.
This is Jim. We probably all took a little different approach. You made a note, Mr. Fairfax, in your one of your observations that had to do with your initial districting plans, that redistricting plans you provided were intended to be a macro view and to have us begin thinking it more detailed. And like a lot of you, I've spent considerable time at this, and it seems to me like there's a hybrid. We're going to take something out of A2 and maybe something out of A1 and possibly something out of I3. I don't know that, and I've heard 6 or 7 of you make different comments, and I've listened and made some notes and agreed. For example, I think the redistricting plan 2 in the formation of District 1, it should have more of Riverside included. I agree with Ben, who was a proponent, and others that expressed the same thing. So I think that does make sense. We're going to get into a little more population there, and there's going to be a deviation percentage, but that may be something that we're going to have to look at. I come back to District 2 because District 2 is the one that is a little harder. I think when you look at, for example, redistricting plans 1 and 3 that we received A3 on May 4th, they have merit with respect to District 3. A3 was updated from the May 1st districting plan. Mr. Fairfax updated that with respect to the formation of District 3. And so today we have A1 and A3, and they have deviation percentages, one of those 7.5 and the other with 1.77. That's okay. And I'm not hung up on deviation percentages. I was just asking the question last week. But I took a little bit out of Plan 1 and 3 that I thought worked for District 3, and a little bit out of Plan A2 that I thought worked for District 1 and Riverside. And with respect to District 4 and 5, it seems to me like they haven't changed much at all from what we've been provided. And I know that these review, but they haven't changed much at all from what we've been provided. And so redistricting plans and 1, 2, and 3 are almost the same. I think what it's going to require there is to shift a little population. We're going to have to shift a little population to Westmont and Hawley from Twin Creeks and Cascade, and shifting a little population will give them a little more, and it will deal with the deviation, and it will lower the deviation in District 5. And there really isn't much more you can do but shift population between District 4 and 5 if you want to follow districting Plan A2 or A3 or A1. They're all kind of the same. So that seems like one that we're just going to have to look at shifting population when the time comes. And then we get to back to District 2. And we've talked about shifting some population from District 2 to Riverside, and that makes sense. That works. But Port Gardner, most of Forest Park, all of Lakeshore View, I need to listen to others. I'm really interested in how others of you feel about District 2 and what your thinking is on what you've looked at to date. And I guess in summary, Plan A2 works for District 1 with Riverside. Plan A1 and A3 can work for District 3 and get things closer together, and Plans 8 and the other plans with respect to District 4 and 5, all three, all of them are the same. It shows that we either keep them that way with a higher deviation, or we can try and make it closer by moving some people from Cascade View and Twin Creeks. I mean, that's an option at 30,000 feet today. I'm just talking at 30,000 feet. We haven't gotten down into the specifics yet, but I think it's a hybrid. You grab a little of what looks good here and there, and many of you have talked about that tonight, and I think that's good. It's District 2 that's a tough one, because I would like to learn more about what everyone's perspective is on District 2 and how it should be formed with the different neighborhoods. So spent about 4 minutes there. Thanks for
So
listening.
I think I live in District 2. If I'm looking at this correctly, District 2 has Valley View in it, correct?
Yes.
So,
Yes,
so,
yes,
so
it
I live in
does.
District 2, and I, of course, I think that Valley View fits in any district that you want to put it in because it's a pretty much cosmopolitan of what the city is like down there in Valley View or here in Valley View. I can't say that, I can't make that blanket statement for Lowell, but I can say that for Valley View. So District 2, I just, other than carving it up and having one or two districts, one or two neighborhoods and multiple districts, I'm comfortable with it. I would hope that we try and figure out how to have, as Kari said, them all of the districts split no more than 2 ways in respect to neighborhoods.
I appreciate your comments on Valley View because I was curious about that. So thank you for your input on that, Ben.
Yeah, we're pretty modern out here. You know, we got running water in the whole 9 yards, except for the house that fell over the cliff. We're all good.
So just to bring it back to, I think, the District 1, it sounds as though, I think, and maybe you all can discuss that, the aspect of the Delta Riverside in being included in District 1 as much as possible, or being partially included, maybe the elimination of this 749 precinct, which is Everett 17, being removed. But pretty much if we add those, like we talked about before, and changed A2, we would actually end up being back to where we were in A1. We would most likely have to add these two precincts if we're going to encompass all of this. And so if that's the case, let me see. Yeah, this is negative 931. So we could add on Bayside that precinct right here, Everett 12. So we could add that precinct right here and only have that. I guess when I was doing this, I thought, well, that would somewhat split the downtown area if it was, and would that cause a problem? It may or may not cause a problem.
Which I get from the lines why that may not look like it causes a problem or not or whatever. It's just that really, yeah, there's businesses that start to trickle in, and then you get to the high school, and then after that it becomes more metropolitan. And so I think there's a lot of homes that circle that school. So having the zigzag stair step down as a part of District 1 to me makes a ton of sense. Okay. And then leaving downtown apartment buildings, businesses separate makes sense.
Good. So actually possibly staying with A1 and adding Everett 12 to District 1, just that precinct. Mm-hmm. And then what we would end up with is this configuration with this added. And I believe since District 1, District 1 is negative 931, then adding 1,000 would bring it really, really close to zero deviation, within tens, let's say, of people. So do you all think that should be at least something that I add and come back to you as a change?
I'd like to see that.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anyone who's really opposed to Everett 12 being part of the potential District 1?
What about Ethel? Does she have anything to say?
Not right now, no.
Okay, so I guess we'll plan for another draft map that has Everett 12 as part of 1. Are there any other changes on A1 that anyone feels particularly passionate about for another draft or for this new draft?
I think that this split, A1 was the one that split 3 ways, Pinehurst, Beverly Park.
Right.
And finding a way to have that only twice.
Right.
The ideal.
Right. So that's another change that I will take a look at.
When we started talking about plans a little while ago, I believe it was Kari and John mentioned redistricting 1 and A2. Has anyone and trying to focus on those as kind of the template to start discussions from? Is that correct, or did we also, was there discussion on A3?
There was discussion on A3, but that's where I was curious about the split of South Forest Park. But as I kind of imagine the map or the geography, it probably makes sense where it's split. So it doesn't seem as much of a concern to me. I think I'm more concerned with the housing around the high school and keeping the residential together up north.
Okay, good point.
So A3, unfortunately, with our new paradigm, actually takes a little more chunk out of Riverside. So most likely, probably a better starting point. That's the reason why I picked A1, which is starting with that, removing that, getting rid of most likely that, possibly. Unfortunately, let me see. Yeah, it's high, 364 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
This is Kari again.
Yeah. Sorry.
So as I think about Riverside and as that continues to drop south, if we kind of stay with how it's angled there, the new housing that's gone in, I think would fit within that chunk of Riverside that's kind of right to the east of I-5 and south of Highway 2. That too would be a part of District 1. And I don't know that those numbers would be in Tony's data because that's 2010 and these homes were built in 2018 perhaps.
Are you talking about the townhomes?
The townhomes, and they're still
those are in
adding
31.
more.
I think that's in Everett 31.
So up to 41st, they're townhomes, and then when they get into past 41st, they are single family homes. There are two sides to that. There are two sides to that.
Scroll down.
Down there.
Yeah.
Because I walk that Riverside quite often.
Oh, is it 30th Drive, 31st Drive? That's that one little section, and then in 31 there's another little section.
So if you go straight down 41st, that splits the two. There's a space, a field in there that they're still developing on. But on the side that's closer to going towards Marysville, going north, the 41st going north, it's their townhomes, I believe. And on the side that is 41st going south, they are single family
dwellings.
I actually live down there. That's correct, Ben. This is Nicole.
Yeah.
So maybe the question might be, in terms, I realize it's a jumping ahead, but about how many people live in that area so as to keep The number square.
It's not a whole lot
Develop,
that live in that new development, and they share there's a lot of like built-in recreation down there that the townhomes share with the larger homes. So that's just something to think about. Is there's a 5-mile trail that connects both of these neighborhoods or areas, and so that's just something to think about. I don't know.
Right.
And we would look at that. That would be one of those things, I guess, we look at the end when we try to enrich the data with more recent population. And so it could be that this 749 jumps up, who knows, to 1,500. I don't know. And then a decision would be made whether to actually move that or not. But right now we're using 2010 data.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
Cool.
Just to make sure it's somewhat sunk in. Personally, I think this is fixed. I think that this has to be in this district because of this precinct configuration.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing is Boulevard Bluff precinct right here. And so we have pretty much, if we use these as a core, then we have really all of this actually fixed, including this. This actually splices it down. Our only choices, if we choose not to split the neighborhoods, and we don't have to, we can split these neighborhoods, and is to come here. So we're if we're thinking about modifying anything down in this area, it's these precincts right here that would be modified or added to by one of these. So if we thought about, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Why would we not want? Or maybe I'll frame it a different way. Well, currently, when I look at all three, A1, A2, and A3, those areas seem like they belong together. Is there a reason? Do some of you feel that? Does anyone feel that breaking that area up is perhaps a better approach than just leaving them kind of lumped together? That District 3. I know that there's a deviation population from District 2, A2 to A1 and A3, but A1 and A3 look pretty good, and and it's an area that makes sense. You've got Forest Park, you've got the Boeing Freeway. Mm-hmm. I'm open. I'd like somebody to kind of weigh in on that, on what Tony's suggesting that we might want to look at.
This is Kari. My camera stopped working, but I agree. I think they are blocked together. I think it's a nice fit. Like District 3 looks appropriate to me.
I agree. I grew up in View Ridge, Madison, and so I spent a lot of time in that area. And I would consider these areas to be very complementary to each other. I would say Evergreen is a little bit different, but still very complementary, I'd say, to the other districts. And I feel like that district just fits together really well. And looking at how those precincts are, any change we made would kind of make the resulting districts just kind of look funny and kind of unnecessarily, in my opinion.
I agree with everything Simone just said.
And if that is true, then this is the reason why, to a certain extent, that 4 is affixed similarly. This Boeing Freeway, if we use that, and this area goes into District 3, then it doesn't make sense to break up the Westmont and the Holly. Holly has the same situation where you have precincts that actually split Holly here. Probably can't see it now, but let's see. You have those same sort of irregular shaped precincts that actually split the neighborhood. And so if Silver Lake comes over that particular district, let's say District 5, not Silver Lake, but the Silver Lake District, that would actually split Holly. And the reason why I added these two is because the only other two then would be to grab these potentially, move that there, and then you have somewhat of an irregular shape, and we could do that with District 5 because it would actually come up here and then jet here and jet there, and I could do that as well, but it didn't seem like as compact as coming down here. And once again, this is one of those precincts that crosses the neighborhood, so we have to split that portion of Westmont because that's just the precinct. So hence the reason why 4 is somewhat constrained. And then once you make 4 constrained, then to a certain extent 5 is constrained, at least the southern part. And all you can change would be this area up here. So once you begin to fix things begin to limit your choices. And that's a good thing and maybe a little bad, but it makes the decision making I don't know, easier, let's say, because you don't have any choices.
Well, Mr. Fairfax, when we looked at what you provided us in A1, A2, and A3, they're all very similar when it comes to the perspective of District 4 and District 5.
Right.
Right.
And so I don't know that you need to get up into District 2, like Valley View or Pinehurst. I'm interested in. I thought Ben said he was comfortable with where it was, but it seems to me like there's a fairly. I know that they're separated by Evergreen. Well, there's an Evergreen Way, and that's a pretty big separation. But I would be interested in those of you that reside in those areas. Is there any reason why we should be shifting some of Cascade View and Twin Creeks into Westmont and Holly Drive to give them more of a voice, that Westmont Casino area? It would seem like it would.
I think and looking at this Plan A3, where you have Cascade View, Twin Creek, and Silver Lake, they're together for 5. I think that fits better than moving them over to Westmont and Holly.
And
I would curious what Chris would have to say. Chris, you would weigh in on that. I can't see. I mean, if you did anything, it would be like moving Cascade View into Westmont and Holly, but I can't see Twin Creek going over it. Any of Twin Creek going over into that area.
Okay. Well, that was just a question.
I know.
And remember, these fit together. It seems to me it's almost like a puzzle piece, and so we can break up the neighborhoods, but there's got to be a rationale for doing so. You know, we shouldn't just break it up just to break it up. It has to be, why are we doing that? Why are we breaking up these two? And so that has to be in the mindset of how we're thinking.
Yeah, I would agree. I think 4 and 5 were fairly boxed in on those, and it's just a matter of fine tuning a dis or a precinct or two.
Chris, would you repeat that, please?
I just said that I feel like we're pretty well set on 4 and 5. All of the models are fairly close to each other, and so I think that we're, like Tony's described, we're fairly boxed in, especially on 4. So I think our focus should be on the other, really 1 and 2. I think 3, 4, and 5 kind of settle themselves, and it's just a matter of moving a precinct here or a precinct there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, the reason
question.
that I mention it, the reason I mention it, committee members, is that I think we all have a desire to make sure that the Casino Road area and that part of Everett, uh, it's important. And how we go about showing that and doing something to assure that they are receiving a lot of the same opportunities and voting in other areas is, that's a city matter. But that's really what's on my mind when I talk about trying to make sure that they have the standing and in voting. And otherwise, I understand breaking up neighborhoods, and I agree, Chris, and I agree, Mr. Fairfax. But that's why I was raising the question, because of that Casino Road wanting to make sure that we recognize that it's important in our decision making.
That's a really good thought, Jim. Julius, do you have anything to say? I know that's an area that you might be more familiar with. When we're looking at this version, we're looking at Plan A3. How we have District 4, what do you think about that?
I want to ask Tony, what is the population in the District 4? Is it plus or minus with the whole, if we left it just the way it is right now?
Right. It's minus 499.
Right.
So we're low 499. Now, the interesting thing is that 5% is only 1,030. So when we add 1,030, we're adding 5%. And so that's why, pretty much when we move a precinct, if we're right there, we may have to subtract a precinct. Very close. So right now, would I say 499 minus 499? So we have about 1,500 potentially that we could actually add on 5 side. What is that? 865. So potentially we could, I could look and shift the precinct over back and forth. But recognize that, practically every precinct, almost every precinct that we add, most likely we may move it outside of deviation. Or under deviation if we remove it, and that has to be compensated.
Well, Mr. Fairfax, you expressed a point of view on 4 and 5, and Chris did, and Ethel did, and that makes sense. I mean, I just making a statement about what was driving my question. I appreciate what Chris said, what Ethel said, and what you said about not breaking up neighborhoods. So I don't know that you need to get too creative unless the committee as a whole feels that and it's so early still. There's a lot of work to do, and we're a long way from the end zone. But unless the rest of the committee feels it, I'm comfortable with what Chris and Ethel said and you said personally.
And in line with what I was just saying, just to give you an idea also, when we look at that Plan 1, if I removed that precinct. It's 1,200 individuals. And right now, we're standing at 365. So we would be negative about 900 and some. So we may be right on if we just remove that.
So we are at the 7:35 mark, and so we can continue on, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I feel like if there's anyone that has pressing questions for Tony, we should ask those now. I feel good that we eliminated B1 today and had some really great conversations around some options for him to bring back better versions at our June 1st meeting. So if you have questions, let's get to them.
Doesn't sound like there are any other questions. Any comments before we wrap this up and talk about what our next steps are going to be?
I'll just throw a high five back to Jim. You complimented me earlier. Thanks for suggesting this meeting. This is, I think, why we have a committee, is we've all got different perspectives, and every time I'm on a call, I learn something from everyone. So I've been a little bit quiet today, but I appreciate the conversation. I think it was a great meeting to have.
I agree with that. This is Kari. Good job.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. Brings good perspective to us in making us really look at these things. And, I think we all have the concern about Casino Road and making sure it's not overlooked. And they're, thought of and considered in this whole mix of things. So I do appreciate it, Jim.
I want to thank everybody for their comments, because I, in much the same vein that Chris was saying, I definitely appreciated this meeting probably more than all the rest of the meetings, because it seems that people were really able to put some their particular thoughts on the table here. So I'm very grateful and very glad that we had this meeting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I think so. Nicole sent out that link for us to be able to give our feedback on the maps. Our next meeting will be June 1st, same time, same place. If no one has anything else, I move to adjourn. No one's going to give me a second?
So moved. It's Kari.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Alrighty. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Sure.